everyone, it's Kim and welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. Welcome back to Bookmarks and Breadsticks. If you're new to my channel, a special hello. And if you're returning, have you subscribed yet? I put out bookish content focusing in the nonfiction space, specifically in food writing. I'm here today to bring you not only my May wrap up, but apparently I never brought you my April reading wrap up either. So we're just gonna put those two lists together. So starting in April, I read The Fruit Hunters. This was my selection for the Unwrap My TBR project. So if you haven't already watched that video, I'll link it above in the cards for you and down below. I won't go into too much detail about it, but it is all about this one author traveling the world to learn all about not only exotic fruit, but the people who have dedicated their lives to learning more about the plethora of fruits from all over the world. Next up, I read a 2021 release, or I believe it's 2021, one sec. Yes, so this is a 2021 release and it is called Glorious Beef, the Lafreda Family and the Evolution of the American Meat Industry by Pat Lafreda. So Pat Lafreda is from a long line of family butchers and one of the best known globally for his setup. Originally, his family was based in New York and now their facilities are so big that they're based in New Jersey. If you are someone who loves the world of butchery, but also the world of meat and want someone with a New Yorker attitude, this is a great book to read. It's just shy of 200 pages, so you can definitely pick this up in an afternoon. Also, I recommend following him on Instagram because you get to see all these beautiful cuts of meat from his shop and all the delicious dishes he cooks with them. So I really enjoyed this one as well. It's not the most in-depth book since it is a little on the shorter side, but you really get a good sense of this guy's personality and his values, which I think is really important when you're coming from a family-owned and operated business. So the third physical book I read this in April, we're still in April. This is Homemade, a story of grief groceries showing up and what we make when we make dinner by Liz Hawk. This was part of the Jacques Pepin reading series that was hosted through Boston University's gastronomy program. So these were like monthly book talks that I was able to sit in on. This is a newer book as well. I actually listened to this book, confession. There's nothing wrong with reading versus listening. But I actually listened to this book. This came out in 2021, so it is a rather new book. I listened to it because the author narrated the book herself. And I've said it many times before, if I can have an author narrate their own audiobook, I am 9 times out of 10 gonna listen to that. I'd say that Homemade was a beautiful story. And I really related to this author. She has lost her dad recently, very quickly to illness. And she's trying to figure out the world without him. And that touches really close to home for me. And one of the things she and her father had always talked about was creating these cooking classes for this house where troubled youth, specifically Black men, it's kind of like a halfway house. I'm not using the right term. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they had talked about making these cooking classes because Liz was from the culinary world, liked cooking, and wanted to do something with her dad. And she just decides that she's going to do it anyway without him. And it's messy, it's imperfect, but you meet a lot of guys, a lot of young men who rotate through this house and Liz's relationship with them. And it's a really sad story in the sense of how much these young men are just set up to fail and how much the system really fails them. But the positive is just watching Liz really go through her grieving process. And also just the book is beautifully written. Obviously the men, their names are all changed for their et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But to get to know these guys and where they come from and what's influenced them, what's important to them, it's a really beautiful story and probably one of my favorite books so far this year. Also read during the month of April, but I don't have the book with me, is, I'll put the picture here, The Savior's Book Cafe Story in Another World, Volume 2. This is about a protagonist who's taken from the real world and brought to a fantastical world where she is meant to be the savior and save everyone, and instead of becoming the savior, she opens a bookshop and a cafe. Next up is Julia Child, A Life. This is by Laura Shapiro. So we listened to this book on our way home for Easter, and this was a snapshot of Julia Child's life, a really condensed biography, about 5 hours, but I will admit that despite, being in this food writing space and knowing of Julia Child, I've never actually sat down to listen to a biography. So it was really nice to kind of understand more and more of Julia Child. I appreciate that this book actually focused on a lot of time when Julia was in some of the war movements, more of her history before she became Julia Child and the chef, and before Julia Child. So if you've listened or watched the movie Julie and Julia, you really get her starting when she gets to France with Paul and needs something to do and starts taking culinary classes. This biography goes further back in time. When you meet before Julia and Paul were ever even an item, when they first met, before they even first met, her childhood. So I really liked it. It was a very short book. Came out in 2007, but is a really good audiobook for the car. And the final book I read for April is The Donut Trap by Julie Tew. I'll put the picture here. This came out in fall of 2021. So look at me, guys, like getting books off my backlist. I'm pretty excited. This is a contemporary romance, this is contemporary fiction, and of course there is food. So Jasmine is the daughter of two immigrant parents who have lived and opened a donut shop. Her family actually has a whole chain of, her extended family has a chain of other donut shops and bakeries around the area as well, but her parents are struggling and she finds herself not quite sure what to do with her life. She's graduated from college but doesn't have any job prospects, and she wants to break free from the daily grind, but a rent hike is threatening her parents' livelihood. On top of that, an old former crush from college named Alex Lai shows up, and sparks fly. So it's a super cute story. It's not a bad story. I just feel like it's a story or a formula I've seen before. I didn't find her the most likable protagonist, but I loved the donut shop. I loved her dedication to her family, even if her family's a pain in the butt. She works really hard and cares about her family and even her brother, and the expectations of being a child of an immigrant and doing more than what your parents had, like the privilege you have of being a child born in a different country with more opportunity than your parents had, that conflict resonates with me very strongly. So there's a lot to like about the book. I just think it's a story we've heard before in some ways. Like some of the most borrowed tropes, some people love that. I read that in like 2 days. That was a great, I always tend to read my fiction options when I've gotten through some really heavy nonfiction. So I definitely picked that book up after reading some nonfiction, and it's always a nice refreshing breath. It's just not always, the Pulitzer of winners, but I love a good foodie fiction rom-com book. Okay, now let's move into the month of May. First, let's start off with the book I DNF'd. I did DNF Making Trader Joe, and this is written by the author and the owner creator of Trader Joe's, excuse me. I'm sorry if you're a fan of Trader Joe's, because this book, he was such a pompous ass in this book. I made it like 65 pages and I just couldn't get through it anymore. And the chapters are supposed to show you all of the risks that this man took to make Trader Joe's the successful business that it is today. I found him very full of himself. I found him superficial and really shallow, and I just couldn't get through it. It's definitely a business book. It is not a, it's not really a food writing book. I thought it would be. There's not a lot of humility in this book. So if you're looking for this really gracious story of how he found his way and made Trader Joe's what it is, you're not gonna get that. So it's already been put out in the Little Free Library, and we are just gonna move on from that. Another book I read this month is Back of House, The Secret Life of a Restaurant by Scott Haas. I'll put the picture here. I did listen to this as an audiobook, and Scott Haas is a food writer, but he is also a clinical psychologist. So Scott Haas decides to spend 18 months immersed in the food world. He follows and lives and works in the kitchen of James Beard Award winner Tony Maw's restaurant Craigie on Main in Boston. So this is all about this one restaurant, this one microcosm of the people that work there, specifically Tony Maw being the chef and owner. And I've seen some reviews where people find that the book is a little too clinical. It's a little too, that the author asserts too much of himself in the book, but I do think Scott Haas is a psychologist, so it's interesting to watch him observe how Tony manages his team, how they thrive under pressure, because throughout the 18-month journey of the book, Tony had been nominated for James Beard. He wins the James Beard, The Ebbs and Flows of Business. How do you build up these young cooks into chefs while also still trying to figure out your own culinary identity? At least that's what Tony's struggling with, even if he's not quite aware of it. It was a good book. I think it's a little bit dated at this point, but what I liked about it was that it's a different lens because of that clinical psychology lens of talking about that maybe Tony has issues managing his team or lets anger get the best of him because of his own relationship with his father. I know that now in 2022, those things probably sound very cliche, that men are not allowed to we're raised not to express their emotions, and times have changed. Like, times have changed, Kim. We're all for men expressing themselves. Well, yes, but remember that this book is from the early 2000s, so a lot has changed. Maybe I'm talking out of the side of my mouth. When did this book come out? I'm so sorry. Boop, 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 ba-doop, boop, ba-doop. This came out in 2013. So, almost 10 years. That's still a decade. That's still a lot of time has passed in the way we raise our young men or our children in general. But I thought it was a really interesting book. It was interesting to see the dynamics of also what hires, what new chef or crew comes in who just has it and has the potential to be a superstar, and those that just aren't going to make it. Wow, I'm saying a lot of ums today, sorry. So that was Back of House. That actually is a book on my unwrapped TBR, but it's wrapped somewhere. But I recognize the title. I know I've bought that book. So part of me is really glad that I'm still continuing to get books off the unwrapped TBR shelf, even if I don't quite know where that book is yet. Okay, so that was an audiobook. A really quick book, very, very tiny, is Classic Candies by Darlene Lacey. It is nothing more than a perfect little, almost like picture book of some of the most classic candies in the world. Just had it on my shelf, got to thumb through it. I love, what did the original Goobers packaging look like? Or Butterfingers, for example. It's more like a collection of advertisements and a little bit of text. But hey, it's pretty cool to see what the original, what peanut butter cups packaging used to look like. I work in food, so I'm always fascinated by the evolution of packaging and identity in candy and food. So super, super short. This is, gosh, 64 pages. Another book I read this month was Kabar. I received this from the University of Iowa. Kabar is An Immigrant Journey of Food, Memory, and Family by Madhushree Ghosh. I have a full review of this on my channel. It is one of my more recent videos. Unfortunately, individual reviews don't get a lot of views on my channel, so if you wouldn't mind clicking on that link, giving it a thumbs up, and helping that video get some more views and likes, I would greatly appreciate it. I love when publishers send me books to read, but I always feel like a little bit of a failure when the views don't get so high. But I get it, individual book reviews are not what Booktube and the Booktube algorithm really likes. They like wrap-ups and lists and tags, but I would really appreciate your support. Also, this is a fantastic memoir. I really loved learning about this immigrant story. I loved learning about a lot of food from India that I don't know a lot about. I also love that the author is she actually works in oncology diagnostics. She is not a foodie herself, which is a different take on a memoir. It's the importance of food and folklore, but it's not part of her daily career, which I found very refreshing. So I'll link that video up in the cards and down below, and I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and watch it after you finish this video. Finish this video first, please. Okay, another book that actually Dan and I have been listening and reading to together is This Is Your Mind on Plants by Michael Pollan. I am a huge fan of Michael Pollan. He is one of the godfathers, in my opinion, of food writing and food journalism. We've been listening to the audiobook because Michael Pollan narrates the books himself. We probably have 2 hours left on the book, but we're driving to Toronto actually right after I finish editing this video and uploading it. So once, that's what great. I love car rides so that we can knock out this book together. And there are This Is Your Mind on Plants. So there are different sections of the book. And Michael Pollan talks about opium, caffeine, and mescaline. So right now we are almost done with the coffee section. We finished opium and we still have mescaline left. I am really liking this book so far. I love Michael Pollan's books. I definitely have other books from him too that aren't as directly food related, like How to Change Your Mind, but I've always enjoyed this. This is his most recent book. This came out last year, as she double checks herself. I never know my publication years. Yeah, this came out in 2021. It is his most recent book, and I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you're interested in the world of plants and how they alter your mind. Apparently, I will forever be a coffee addict, and 90% of the world is an addict because we're addicted to caffeine, so it's a very interesting and refreshing read, as always. Okay, two more. Stuffed and Starved. This is by Raj Patel, The Hidden Battle for the World's Food System. This is an older book that does receive updates throughout. How do I explain this? It's on its second edition, so there have been some updates to the book. So let me see, when was the original publication date of this? So the original publication of this was in 2007, and then the updated version, the second edition, came out in 2012. I do believe that this book is up for another update as well for 2022. Wow, a 10-year update. That'd be kind of crazy. This is about current events, environmental studies, so it's about food, but definitely from global supply chain. Why are some communities hungry all the time, despite having a world with a surplus of food in certain areas? Stuffed and Starved gives you an up-to-the-minute detailing, not really because now it's old, of how the world has perversely come to have over 1 billion people starving and even more people than that who are overweight. To find out how we got to this point, Raj Patel launched a worldwide investigation into the global food network. It took him from a colossal supermarket in California to India's wrecked paddy fields, to Africa's bankrupt coffee farms, and, in this fully revised edition, to some of the biggest issues of our day. Land grabbing in Africa, spikes in diabetes rates worldwide, dramatic new Chinese food policies, climate change, and the return of the food riot. So I think that this is a very timely book. I think it's important to be reading these kinds of books. As you guys know, I am from Buffalo. There was a shooting massacre a couple of weeks ago, and part of the profiling on where the shooter decided to attack these innocent people had to do with he targeted the only food store, a Tops grocery store, within a predominantly Black neighborhood. And now that grocery store is closed, which it creates a lack of access to food. It's considered food apartheid, which is systematic racism that deprives people access to fresh food. I've debated doing a whole video just about food apartheid and about the shooting. I just don't feel like I'm enough of an expert to really discuss it in detail, but if you guys are interested, I can put together a video about it. I do have links, research, and things like that. Or if you guys want a list of books about food apartheid and food deserts, I can also always suggest those to you guys. Just let me know in the comments below. But listening to this book, I was in Iowa for work last week, so I had a lot of time on my hands and a lot of driving in the middle of nowhere. Really in the middle of cornfields. Quite honestly, this book really hit close to home because I was surrounded by cornfields on both sides of me, and it dawns on me that still there's hunger all over the world, which is part of why Read It and Eat, my small business, exists. It's why I donate. A portion of the proceeds is donated. It's always about fighting hunger. So this is dense. This is gonna be a dense book to get through. It is environmental journalism, but it is definitely worth the read. If you listen to the audiobook, you can definitely speed it up. I got it up to about 1.3, 1.4 for my tolerance. It is not narrated by the author, but there's a fantastic author, and I listened to it on Scribed. So the final book I just finished yesterday is Hana Khan Carries On by Juzma Jalaluddin. This is a retelling of You've Got Mail and is about two rival halal restaurants in Toronto, specifically in the Golden Crescent. This is from the author of Aisha at Last, and sales are slow at the Three Sisters Biryani Poutine, the only halal restaurant in a close-knit Golden Crescent neighborhood of Toronto. Hana waitresses there part-time, but what she really wants to do is tell stories on the radio. If she can just outshine her fellow intern at the city radio station, she may have a chance at landing a job. In the meantime, Hana pours her thoughts and dreams into a podcast where she forms a lively relationship with one of her listeners. But soon she'll need all the support she can when a new competing restaurant, a more upscale halal place, is about to open in Golden Crescent, threatening her mother's restaurant. This was such a delight to read. I've had it on my shelves for about a year, and I'm so glad to get it off the list, but also read it. I really loved the story. I loved the immigrant conversation, being a child of an immigrant. I loved that the book didn't take place in America. I don't know, like, it's nice to read diversity and read about areas outside of the United States that also still face racism in their own ways. also these family ties. There is like, the romance is definitely like the B plot of this story. This is really about Hannah trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life, how she's going to get into radio, but also dynamics between her and her mother, her aunt who has come in from India, along with her cousin who is 18, Rashid. It is a wonderful story, beautifully written, and a really great way to close off May. I recognize that it's actually the last Friday before May, leading into Memorial Day. I might finish another book or two, but I will be traveling to Toronto with Dan, so that might be part of that vlog instead of this. Who knows? But these are all the books that I have read in the months of April and May. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books, if you're more interested in a more thorough review on any of them, or if there's another book that you're like, Kim, you just gotta get on your TBR as soon as possible. If you haven't already, I would love for you to hit like and subscribe. Check out the other videos I have referenced throughout using the links down below or in the cards. I would love and appreciate your support. And if you want more up-to-date news on what I'm reading, don't forget to also follow me over on Instagram at Bookmarks and Breadsticks. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.